Confidence is increasing that the coronavirus outbreak originated in a Wuhan lab as a part of China's efforts to compete with U.S. medical research. Now, here's a clip from yesterday's Coronavirus Task Force press conference with John Roberts of Fox News asking this question of the president.
Sources are telling Fox News today that the United States government now has high confidence that while the coronavirus is a naturally occurring virus, it emanated from a virology lab in Wuhan, that because of lax safety protocols, an intern was infected, who later infected her boyfriend, and then went to the wet market in Wuhan, where it began to spread. Does that correspond with what you have heard from officials?
Well, I don't want to say that, John, but I will tell you more and more we're hearing the story, and we'll see. When you say multiple sources, now there's a case where you can use the word sources, but we are doing a very thorough examination of this horrible situation that happened.
Well, on February the 10th, my next guest was here on Washington Watch suggesting just that. Joining me now is Gordon Chang, the author of The Coming Collapse of China. And you can make sure to follow Gordon on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Gordon, at the beginning of the program, I played a clip from your interview on February the 10th where you said there was evidence, or at least there was such evidence that would suggest that this could have come from a laboratory in Wuhan.
Yes, and since that time, we've learned a lot more. The most important thing is that on January 24, the Lancet, which is the authoritative British medical journal, said that many of the initial cases of COVID-19 had no connection with the wet market, which meant that there had to be another source. Since that time, we've learned more. So, for instance, everyone's talking about bats. Bats were not sold at the wet market in question, and the list goes on and on. One other thing, Tony. About 2 weeks ago, China started opening up its wet markets across the country. That's an indication that Beijing does not think that wet markets were the source of the coronavirus. So why would they open them up if they thought there was going to be another epidemic? I think that right now we can say that the virology lab in Wuhan is the source of the epidemic. Beijing knows. Beijing should tell us. The question is, what is Beijing hiding right now?
Well, that raises a lot of questions because they've hidden facts from the very beginning. They knew early on that this was being communicated, transferred from human to human. They denied that, covered that up. Now there's evidence mounting that it did come from a laboratory. The question is, if it was in a laboratory and they were not doing anything, bad, why would they not tell us? What might they have been doing in the laboratory with this?
I think the answer to the question is that Beijing is terribly concerned that the whole reputation of China's scientific community is going to be tattered because of the release of the coronavirus. And remember, this is a P4 lab. This is the highest level of security for a biological lab. And that indicates that China has been basically incompetent in protecting the contents of the lab. Remember, the Wuhan Institute of Virology used to note on its website that it kept 1,500 strains of coronavirus inside. And apparently right now we have seen that their protocols are terribly insufficient.
So, everything I've seen suggests that this is natural, but is there any genetic modification of this that we know of?
There is a paper by 3 virologists that talked about the splicing of the coronavirus. That paper was withdrawn. At the present moment, the weight of scientific evidence suggests that this was a naturally occurring virus that was accidentally released. But the one thing that we do know for sure, Tony, is that Beijing has done its best to prevent the foreign international community from actually studying the coronavirus. So we don't have virologists or epidemiologists on site in Wuhan working with their Chinese counterparts. And in fact, over the last 10 days, Beijing has been implementing new rules that any scientific paper on the origin of the coronavirus has first got to go to Beijing to get approval before it can be published. That's another indication that Beijing knows it came from this lab.
Well, Gordon Chang, let me ask you another question beyond the actual makeup of this virus, but let's talk about the lab and the lack of security there. What's the way forward here? I mean, I would think the international community, WHO, which has obviously been compromised in this, who is going to ensure that there are standards that for these type of laboratories that this does not happen again? I mean, this has brought down the entire world economy.
Yes, it has. It's by the time that it's done, it will kill hundreds of thousands of people. It will sicken millions of people. And the answer to your question is the United States, for all its power, does not have the ability to make sure that that Wuhan lab adheres to the proper protocols, which means that we really have to reduce our contacts with China to protect ourselves in the future. If you can't reform the system, you've got to cut it off. And that, although that's unfortunate, and a lot of people don't want to do that, the question is we can't afford to go through another pandemic. And these diseases periodically are generated in China, and sometimes they escape to the rest of the world. We can't allow that to happen again.
So you're talking about global distancing.
Absolutely. And I think that we're going to have to go to a situation very much like the Cold War with the Soviet Union, because at this point, China has shown that it's not able to reform itself.
Well, Gordon Chang, you know your stuff. You were saying this 2 months ago. So thanks so much for joining us, and we will continue to track this, and we'll talk to you real soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tony.
Gordon Chang, Gordon G. Chang on Twitter if you'd like to follow him.